Hi everyone, it's Lindsay with High Altitude Astrology, and today I'm going to be looking at the chart of Joe Rogan. And if you want to follow along, his birthday is August 11th, 1967. He was born in Newark, New Jersey, and I don't have a birth time, so I'm working off of a solar chart. So Joe is a Leo sun at 18 degrees, and I think that's pretty evident in his outward nature. He's dabbled in acting, and he just generally kind of shines very strongly. He has a very strong personality, and a lot of people kind of gravitate towards that. And the reason also why, not only because he's a Leo sun, which tends to attract a lot of attention, but his sun is conjunct Jupiter. And Jupiter's at 16 degrees Leo. So this can be interpreted in a few different ways. Jupiter is about expansion. Jupiter is about optimism. Jupiter is about wanting to see the world in from a bigger perspective, and also share bigger perspectives with those around you. So to have Jupiter right next to the sun, basically it can just kind of expand your solar energy. So it expands that Leonian, quality of generosity and of just radiating his energy. And that really does draw more people to him in his life. But he's also kind of like a philosopher. And he has a podcast. It's called the Joe Rogan Experience. And if you listen to it, there is an element of him really wanting to genuinely understand things more for himself, but also share that with the world. So to me, that Sun Jupiter in Leo definitely kind of fits for, especially for this situation he's found himself in, doing the podcast and the subject matters that he touches on. I mean, he tries to bring in people from all walks of life, and just talking. They talk for 3 hours at a time about life, and sometimes it's from a scientific perspective, sometimes it's more from an experiential perspective, sometimes it's teaching about ways of living that people he knows have, like through killing their own meat, they're hunters, that kind of thing, to whatever, authors, that kind of thing. It's actually a very interesting podcast. If you're into podcasts, you might want to check it out. Now, what's interesting about his sun is that it squares his Mars-Neptune conjunction in Scorpio. So his Mars is at 11 degrees, squaring his sun at 18 and his Jupiter at 16 of Leo. And his Neptune's at 21 degrees, squaring that Sun-Jupiter conjunction in Leo as well. Now, let's just break this down a little bit. Mars in Scorpio, that is somebody who really wants to express their strength through intense experiences, uncovering, getting to the bottom of things. And it's just a very powerful placement to have your Mars. In some ways, it's kind of like a BS detector. You really want to know the truth of things, and you want to assert yourself in that way too. So you value honesty, you value the process of transformation, and really you seek that process of transformation in your own life. And I know he has studied many styles of martial arts. He is a martial art practitioner. He also is a commentator for the UFC, which is a fighting organization. And he also just really is not afraid, and you can hear this in his podcast. He's not afraid to question. He's not afraid to really confront, because he's seeking the truth. That's what Mars in Scorpio wants to do. They assert themselves, that's Mars, in this scorpionic way of seeking the truth, but also it's in a very transformative way, and that's what martial arts helps you with. Because when you're asserting yourself in this transformative way, you've got to learn how to let go. You have to learn how to focus your energy and focus your attention and not get sidetracked by the garbage. So the Mars and Scorpio energy is really good for learning how to let go and stay focused and stay centered. Now, that Mars in Scorpio, like I said, is conjunct Neptune. It's a very wide conjunction, but it is there. And to have Mars and Neptune together, this gives him that part of him that actually wants to, can be interpreted in a few different ways. I can see that Mars, Neptune, because Neptune can be about our beliefs. Neptune can be about wanting to connect with the transcendent aspect of reality, transcending the ego, transcending the self. And he's very much been about that in his life. So his Mars, his assertive energy, is connected to that Neptunian transcendent energy. This is someone who has explored, and again, both in Scorpio, going to the depths, he has explored himself through the use of psychedelic drugs. And he's also somebody who seems like he's constantly kind of trying to pierce the veil of beliefs in order to really find some truth to things. So that's how I see that Mars, Neptune, and Scorpio manifesting in his life. But also, when you see Mars and Neptune near each other in the chart, that can very much mean somebody who's involved in acting or show business, because Neptune also, through that transcendent experience, allows us to connect with imagination. That's what Neptune can also be about. So to have your action energy, which is Mars, sitting next to Neptune, the energy of imagination, you're going to get somebody who uses their imagination in their work, uses their imagination in how they assert themselves. And in Scorpio, if you ever listen to his stand-up, and a lot of comics are like this, but he's pretty intense. He can easily kind of cut you down, or whatever topic he's talking about. It's not always like happy comedy. It's intense comedy. It can get dark. It can get it's like wanting to, that's what comedy is. It's like you're exposing the things that people don't regularly want to talk about. You're exposing the taboo. And that Mars Neptune, to me, is significant in Scorpio, is significant of that aspect of himself. So that Mars Neptune squares his Sun Jupiter. And with the square, it's like the energies are creating a 90-degree angle to one another. And that is symbolic of, it's like they're both trying to express themselves, but they bump into each other. They have trouble. And it's like some adjustment is needed. And a lot of times with squares, it takes time, because you kind of repeat the pattern of this energetic challenge over and over until you finally kind of like resolve it. You finally like wake up and you're like, oh, okay, this is that energy again. All right, how can I do it differently? And the way that I see this, I don't really know if he ever had any struggles with drugs and alcohol, but to have Mars Neptune squared Sun Jupiter could be an indication of somebody who, maybe at one time like went a little overboard in that direction and learned how to kind of control himself more. But also what I see, and I'm seeing it more now in his life, because that Sun Jupiter wants philosophies, wants some sort of larger perspective. But with the square from Mars Neptune, it's like sometimes the imagination can allow that need for a larger perspective to get out of proportion. And I know he's gone through a process in his life where he was kind of, I would say, out there in some of the way he looked at things in life. And maybe some of that had to do with his experiences with drugs and the way that it kind of expanded his mind and his need to try to interpret what was going on. But also he's been a little, I think at times, into conspiracies, but I think he's pulled back a lot from that in his life. And I think a lot of that has to do with this podcast, because he's meeting new people. And now and he's learning things. And now he's kind of like really into, okay, let's make sure we are talking from a factual perspective. And if there's still something there that isn't explainable to him, you know, he has now more of the perspective of, well, I just don't know. It's rather than like jumping to the, oh, it's got to be that, you know, like, oh, it's got to be this theory. You know, now he's more like, you know, I can't say that it's that theory. So all I know is that I don't know what it is. So I find that interesting that he seems to have made that shift in his life. His sun, Jupiter, trines Saturn, and his Saturn's at 12 degrees Aries. So what's interesting about that is that, you know, it gives him that optimistic self-expression that he has in Leo, wanting to be seen and wanting to shine, is trining Saturn in Aries. Saturn in Aries, Saturn, his work ethic. Aries, let's go, let's do it, let's go for it. You know, so that gives him a lot of energy to really ground that those Sun Jupiter expansive ideas into reality. And he's certainly somebody who has accomplished, you know, a great deal in his life. If you know, Google him and understand him more deeply. I mean, the guy's just had an amazing career. If you remember him, he did Fear Factor, and that was one of his big, you know, breakthrough roles. And then of course he's done a lot of stand-up comedy in his life as well. But Fear Factor kind of put him on the map and made him known, and really gave him, you know, an advantage in life so that he could continue to do his stand-up without, like, you know, with a solid foundation in his life. He also has his Mercury in Leo, and that energy is squaring his Mars in Scorpio. And you can kind of hear that sometimes, because Mercury, again, is about our communication. Of course, Mercury in Leo, it wants to communicate in a way that makes others feel important or feel like understood. You know, Mercury in Leo really wants to, it's a grand sign, it's a generous energy, you know, so it wants to communicate in a way that makes others feel welcome, that makes others feel recognized. But with that square to Mars and Scorpio, it's like sometimes he can't hold back his criticism, perhaps, or just again, it's this bullshit detector where he really kind of has to point out where others are maybe wrong, or, you know, it's just this questioning. It's this questioning part of him. And so there's probably this struggle that he goes with, because again, it's this square, Mercury and Mars square. The Mercury in Leo wants to be seen as being, you know, kind-hearted and generous and communicating in a way that makes people feel good. But that Mars in Scorpio is like, wait a minute, I'm calling bullshit here. You know, I need to really, you know, just say this. And let me put something in here. I know he's not a, quote, believer in astrology, and it's unfortunate, because if he really were to study this, and he is somebody who can study things deeply, especially with that Mercury squared Mars in Scorpio, I think he'd see that there is some information in astrology that might make him realize it's not necessarily all bullshit. But he's a skeptical guy, and you know, I've heard him on his podcast. He thinks astrology is bullshit. He's, you know, and he kind of lumps it in with psychics and this and that, you know, and it is what it is. But I just wish at some point in his life he'd like take a deeper look at it, because he's got the ability to really study something deeply. I mean, that's what martial arts is all about. You've got to do it repetitively, and you have to commit yourself to it. And if he did, I think he'd discover something that he doesn't really understand about it, but he's already kind of made up his, you know, his mind. And you hear that when he talks. Now, he's also got Venus in Virgo, and that gives him that interest in health. And oh my gosh, he has an interest in health. So Venus is about our pleasures and the things that make us feel good. And Virgo is the sign of health. It's the sign of breaking things down into, finite understanding and really, understanding how things work, the intricacies of things. And so for somebody to have Venus in Virgo, one interpretation of it is that they would be interested in health. And he tries all kinds of health things in his life to make himself feel better and to make his life better. And, he talks about it all the time on his podcasts. But also somebody with Venus in Virgo, this is somebody who expresses their loving energy in a very, because that's what Venus is about too. It's our feminine expression of our loving nature. And to have it in Virgo, this is somebody who is caring. This is somebody who is concerned about other people. And you can hear that in his self-expression. He seems to have a genuine care and concern for other people. Yeah. So that Venus in Virgo is conjunct Pluto in Virgo. His Venus is at 13, his Pluto is at 19. And this just, again, speaks more to that part of him that really wants to transform himself from a health perspective. Because Pluto is about the process of transformation, death and transformation, eliminating and rising, the phoenix rising from the ashes. So that energy is connected with his Venus energy, his pleasure energy in the sign of Virgo, health. So it just adds an intensity to his desire to really transform himself through his health. All right, so let's move on to his transits and his progressions and his solar arcs that are going on right now in his life. Couple of interesting things. He's having Pluto in conjunct, which is a 150-degree angle to his sun. And this started in February of 2017 and it ends in October of 2018. And because, again, that sun is really close to Jupiter in the sign of Leo, with this Pluto in conjunct, Pluto in Capricorn, transiting in conjunct that solar energy, I feel like it's asking him to really ground his perspective of how he, expands his perspective in life and the perspective of others. There's something that's being asked of him to transform around that, because that's what Pluto's all about. And Pluto in Capricorn has a lot to do with transforming, the Capricornian structures in life, like government and the political structures that form our society, and but also it's just like transforming the way things have always been. Capricorn is all about just staying the same, basically, and so I feel that this is the time, because I've heard it through his podcasts, where he's beginning to kind of rein in maybe that Jupiterian energy a little bit and transforming his perspective on how he wants to expand his perspective. And it's what I feel that it's doing, especially because that Sun Jupiter in his natal chart squares that Mars Neptune conjunction, is it's grounding him a little bit more in reality. It's saying time to rein in maybe some of those less substantiated ways of looking at things. And I just feel when I've listened to him lately, it seems like his thinking is taking a little bit more of that track. He's well, it can't just always be think whatever you think and it's true. It's more grounded in well, what are the facts? What's the reality? Let's, really understand this from the perspective of truth. The other thing that's happening right now in his life is that transiting Neptune is opposing his Venus. So Neptune is in Pisces, and his Venus, again, is at 13 Virgo. And this started in February of 2018, and it's going to end in December of 2018. And to have Neptune opposite your Venus, Neptune can be a very creative energy. Like I was saying, it has to do with our imagination. And so does Venus. Venus can also be about our creative expression. So for him, this could just be a very creative time for him in his life, where he can focus the creative energy and use the imagination to create. Sometimes with Venus-Neptune transit, it brings up relationship issues, because Venus is about our loving nature. It's about what we need to feel to feel good, you know, and to have Neptune opposing it sometimes can bring in just like doubts and questions and, you know, wondering whether or not we are getting our pleasure needs met. And let me read something from Robert Hand about this to clarify it just a little bit more. This transit can create other kinds of relationship difficulties, such as obscure problems within an existing relationship. For example, you may find it difficult to communicate with your partner, or one of you may do something behind the other's back, thus undermining your mutual confidence. It's important to play as straight as possible with your partners, because Neptune can leave long-lasting scars in a relationship if you do not work to minimize its effects from the very beginning. The most useful effect of this transit is that it stimulates the creative imagination. In fact, every illusion or delusion is really only a misuse of creative imagination, or a confusion of imagination with truth. If you can keep the truth and imagination separate, you will derive great benefit from this transit, especially if you are intrinsically creative. Artistic creativity is heightened by this influence, and even your relationships can be more interesting if you don't lose sight of their real nature. A few other transits that he's going through. He's also having Jupiter squaring his Sun from January of 2018 to September of 2018. He's also having Jupiter, and again, Jupiter's in Scorpio, squaring his Jupiter from December 2017 to August 2018. And Jupiter transits, you know, expand. Jupiter in Scorpio, though, has been about expanding our world through transformation. And so it's squaring that Sun, and it's squaring that Jupiter in Leo. And you know, perhaps there's just personal, like, again, this to me could mean his perspective just changing and shifting a bit. Because Jupiter in Scorpio wants to eliminate, wants to get rid of, wants to get rid of what's not, you know, working or serving, or it's just getting to the bottom of shit. And so Jupiter, you know, in Scorpio, squaring that Sun-Jupiter conjunction in Leo, just, you know, might be inviting him to really, again, kind of get more clear on how he wants his bigger perspective approach in the world to happen. And two other things. He's having Mercury has progressed into Scorpio. It actually happened last year. It's at 1 degree now. Mercury in Scorpio, communication, thinking, for the first time is now moving into the sign of Scorpio for him. Remember, he was born with it in Leo. Now it's in Scorpio. And again, Scorpio wants to get to the bottom of shit. Scorpio is the detective. So it's just introducing a new way of his thought process. You know, Mercury in Leo is like a lot of fun, you know, but you know, in wanting to talk in a way that brings attention to you. Mercury in Scorpio wants to really get to the bottom of things. It's the investigator. And finally, he's having two solar arcs. One, his Mars just went into Capricorn, and his natal Mars, remember, is at 11 degrees Scorpio. So this is the first time that his Mars has progressed by solar arc into Capricorn. And Mars and Capricorn, Mars, our assertive nature. Capricorn, earth energy, grounded, cardinal. You know, it's the workhorse. It's the energy of like being able to put the work into things, doing things repetitively in order to create and to build foundation in our lives. So it's an interesting energy for his Mars to move into. It's definitely a grounded energy. It's very practical in how he wants to assert himself, and it could give him a lot of drive. So finally, Uranus in Scorpio by solar arc is conjuncting his natal Mars in Scorpio. And this is just going to be bringing insight into how, you know, he wants to assert himself. It's going to be bringing very unusual, shocking, perhaps out of the ordinary ways of asserting himself. And especially in that sign of Scorpio, of transformation, of going deep, of looking and penetrating underneath the surface. You know, that could just mean that he's willing to take risks. He's willing to take risks in order to get to the truth of things. Because that's what Uranus is all about. It's like, it's insight, it's new insight, and then it's conjuncting, it's sitting on top of that Mars, how we assert ourselves in that way of penetrating deeply, Scorpio, you know, to the bottom of things. So this has been my interpretation of Joe Rogan's chart. Thank you for watching. If you like my channel, please subscribe. And I also offer readings. You can reach me at info@highaltitudeastrology.com. Thank you so much. Adios.